No post-Mueller Trump bump in the polls. Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, our friend Nate Silver over at 538 has the scoop that Donald Trump has not gotten any more popular as a result of the Mueller report summary revealing that no collusion. So, the question he asks is why? And he gives about 6 different reasons why, but I'd rather kind of take it from the gut instinct of one Stephen Green. Steve, when you first hear that kind of a headline, and I know we chatted about the reasons during our backstage thing, so you've been clued in, and you probably read it before I ever heard of it. But what would be your first instinct when you hear that Donald Trump got no post-Mueller report polling bump?
Well, first, I'd like to share with you some wisdom, some hard-earned wisdom that you don't read this or hear this all the time, but something I'd like to share with you. The only poll that counts is the one on Election Day. No, you've heard that. No, more seriously, I really, I live in the news cycle 5-6 days a week, and I just don't really care about the poll numbers. That's not to say that this is not worth pursuing, because it is. Since President George H.W. Bush, we've had what have we had? Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and now Trump. 5 presidents. And 3 of these presidents, and I think this really shows how polarized we've gotten, 3 of these presidents have had their polls in fairly narrow ranges. They've got a pretty low ceiling because of the polarization, but they've got a pretty high floor because their core supporters are never going to give up on them. The 2 exceptions were the 2 Bushes themselves, who proved to be so alienating to their own Republican constituencies that their natural floors actually tended to be the floor of an elevator that started on the top floor of the building and then swiftly declined as their terms wore on. Maybe I should say as their terms kind of ground on, if you'll remember back. That said, so why didn't Trump get a bump? I think people have already discounted the Mueller investigation. We did a segment on the release of this thing, and one of the theories is that people are holding out for the full report. And honestly, I'm a big believer in full disclosure in government. This is a case where I don't want full disclosure. And let me tell you what the reason is. Number one, we have just way too many laws and way too many crimes in this country. Things that just laws that shouldn't be on the books. So when a prosecutor, let's say your DA, if a DA were to bring you up on charges for almost anything that's illegal now, and did a full look into your history, into your friends, your acquaintances, your phone numbers, your bank records, and all the other things that a DA can dig into trying to bring your case to court. The DA gets all of these records and in the end finds that, our bad, there's nothing to bring you up on, and you're free to go. Well, what if everything that the DA investigated on you was then part of the public record? Everything they found out about you in this in-depth investigation. Well, that's what went on with not just President Trump, but with, I think, the entire White House. Is they went into all of this stuff for 2 years. And given the size and scope of the federal government, I don't think any human being, much less a human being that made his fortune in the kind of shady area of casinos and hotel management around the world, can survive the kind of stuff that would come out in this sort of investigation. I don't want it public. And so I think what's going on here is that people have discounted it. They're not waiting for the full results. They know after 2 years of nothing that it's a big nothing. And Bill, what was it you said in the backstage, that it's the Mueller report of blank? That should be.
I actually said that. No. I actually said that Beto O'Rourke was the Mueller report of politicians.
That's what it was. And the Mueller report of should be the new way of saying nothing burger.
That's
right. It's The Last Jedi was the Mueller report of Star Wars sequels. You can play this game as much as you want, and I think that's where they are. There's no big bump, but there was never going to be a big bump, and there's also not going to be a big crater either.
And I suppose that the Mueller report is the Beto O'Rourke of reports.
That's it. There you go. It works. It's a perfect symmetry.
It goes both ways. So, Bill Whittle, at first I was going to read through these reasons why they thought that, that he wasn't getting a bump in this. But I guess I'd rather make it a little more personal from the perspective of the president who's had to endure 2 years of this stuff, only to find out that when what he was saying over and over again, no collusion, was in fact the case. It's got to be a little frustrating for him, I would suppose. So let me ask you, if you were the president or his advisors for his campaign right now, is there any way to use the Mueller report to get a bump?
Yeah, and you save that bump for the only polls that actually count, which come out in November of 2020. Steve's absolutely right about that. What Donald Trump should be able to do without any difficulty whatsoever is to say, hey, the American people elected me because they because they believed that our government had been turned against them. And I said that the FBI was spying on me, and the newspapers and the left and the mainstream media said I was nuts and that I was lying. Turns out it was true. They said that I said that the government, in terms of the director of the FBI and the director of the CIA and all the rest, were weaponized against me and inventing lies and so on. For 2 years, CNN said that I was lying and crazy, and it turned out it was true. And the Mueller report said that I'd colluded with the Russians when I'd been telling nobody I had, and telling people that I had not. And we went through 2 more years of this, and they said I was crazy, and it turned out it was true. Now, it's not, and this is where Trump could I think, seal the deal, is to basically say, look, I'm a real estate developer from New York. I don't care what these people say about me. I've never cared about what they say about me. But the more important point is, what are they saying about you? What are they saying about you? You believed that the government was being weaponized against the American people and trying to determine the course of the election. And it turns out the press laughed at you and mocked you. It turns out you were right. You were saying that there was no collusion with the Russians, that there was no evidence to believe that. And for 2.5 years, you were mocked and told you were wrong by the mainstream media. And it turns out you were right. And it turns out that whatever you think of me personally, all of the things that I said were happening actually happened. And parenthetically, when I said I'd make America great again, you may have to remember ISIS by looking them up in the Wikipedia entry, because they're gone. Our economy is growing at 5 or 6 times the rate that it used to. Our defense industry is stronger. We're challenging the Chinese finally on this idea of being able to put ocean limitations anywhere they want to. We've got the lowest minority unemployment in the history of the country, and they're still telling you that you're crazy and that I'm crazy, but neither of us are. So why don't we show these arrogant bastards what they can do with their intentional lies designed to keep them in political power? That's pretty much what I think how I would wrap it up. The reason that Trump didn't get a bump off of this was because the Mueller report. We say that the Mueller report was released 2 weeks ago, but that's just not true. The Mueller report has been in the process of being released for the last 2.5 years. And really, the Mueller report was released after the first year, right? I mean, so to me, the reason that the Mueller report didn't get the exoneration of Trump didn't get him a bump is because the Mueller report, I think, has been like the perfect analogy of NASA's announcement that there may be life on Mars. If NASA had come out in 1976 said, hey, we scooped up the dirt and we poured some water on it and these things started swiggling around, here's some video of them, then people would have been like, wow. But that's not what happened. First, we find out that there may be indications that Mars may have had water in the past. And then we see signs that this may or may not have been a sinuous tributary, which may or may not have been caused by water. And then we determine that there might be signs of radar indicating that there might be water below the surface. And then we see actual pictures of frozen water, but liquid water may have existed at some point in the history of Mars. And then we find out through the order, and blah, 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 blah. And after 25 or 30 years, we finally have another announcement after another announcement after another announcement saying we have just discovered that liquid water is in fact possible on the surface of Mars in the present day. Dun, 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 dun. And it's like, at this point, show me the squiggly thing or just stop. Because that's exactly what happened, Scott. After the first 6 months or a year, I kept saying to myself, okay, if there's real, genuine collusion, something really actionable, and this guy has the resources he's got, then we're going to hear about it by now. And after the first year, I thought there's probably nothing. And then by the second year, I was sure there was nothing. And when Nancy Pelosi says he's not worth impeaching, I knew there was nothing. And guess what, Scotty? There's nothing. So Donald Trump doesn't get bonus points for me because I never believed this stuff. So his vote was not, his numbers were not suppressed by my ongoing suspicion about collusion when the people who launched the investigation were the people who placed the evidence there in the first place.
Yeah, you know, Bill, if I can interrupt for just a sec, you just reminded me of something. The Nancy Pelosi statement from a few weeks ago really made my radar ping. And there was this probably 2-month long backing off of impeachment by the big name Democrats, the established Democrats, not the up and coming super left progressives, that just made me think that Mueller was leaking like crazy to them, letting them know, hey, there's nothing here. You guys got to chill.
Scott asked me on a Bill Whittle Now episode when Nancy Pelosi said that he wasn't worth impeaching, what do you make of that, Bill? And I just said, they got nothing.
Yeah.
They got nothing.
That's right.
And they don't. But as I said in the firewall, they have accomplished their mission, which is to spend 2.5 years of undermining Donald Trump's support and legitimacy, the legitimacy of the 2016 election. There's still half of the country believes that he did these things that he didn't do and that there's no evidence that he did, in the same way that 40% of the country believes that Brett Kavanaugh's a rapist based on allegations from a woman who couldn't remember the decade in which they happened and who claimed to produce witnesses who would corroborate the story and who, in point of fact, ran as fast as they possibly could. So this is what happens when you use that kind of politics.
Well, I have 2 minor missions in life. These aren't the overriding purposes of my life, but they are 2 minor missions in life. The greater one and the more important one probably is teaching boys how to do a proper handshake with eye contact, a firm grip, and just the proper deportment. But yes, almost as important as that is teaching people how to read a news story. And the question here is being asked by Nate Silver, why didn't President Trump get more of a bump from the release of the Mueller report? Our mind immediately goes to trying to answer that question. But the real important part here is not what is the answer to that question, but why the question? Why is there that question? You didn't come up with that question. Nate Silver did, or somebody fed that to Nate Silver, and he decided that maybe an editor fed that to him. And so what's behind this story? Let's tease that out. How did that get there? So why the question? Well, clearly the question arises from the fact that someone expected Trump to get a polling bump after the release of the Mueller report. Why? Why was he expected to get a bump? Because someone thought that the process of investigating President Trump's connections with Russia was depressing his popularity numbers. And who would think such a thing but the people who are behind pushing this investigation? So what is really disappointing to the people who advance this theory that Trump was colluding with Russia to throw the 2016 election is that they didn't have any impact. Is that they weren't depressing his numbers. There was no difference when the probe was over. Nothing changed because
Genius.
Trump didn't have a wasted 2.5 years. The Democrats had a wasted 2.5 years, and now they've got to figure out what to do for the next 1.5 years so that somehow they can unseat this incredibly successful incumbent who has managed to defeat all of their efforts and to actually thrive on the distractions that they sought to undercut him with. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.